I saw the same sorts of things in college as well, with people saying, oh, well, you are Black, but you want to go into ocean science, but like, LOL, Black people can't swim. And I was like, haha, original, great.
Welcome to Reclaimed Personas. I'm Philippe Charles. In this podcast, I speak with Black folks building dynamic personal brands that center their identities. With the help of digital media, they're seizing control of their own professional narratives in their own voice.
My voice is more important than the notion of who I am. Reclaim personas. Reclaim personas.
In this episode of Reclaim Personas, I had the chance to speak with Jaida Elcock, a marine scientist finishing up her Ph.D. I first came across her on Instagram, where she was posting these fun, quirky, educational videos about marine life. In our conversation, she talked about how these videos helped her social media presence blow up. But we also talked about what it was like for her growing up in predominantly white spaces as a biracial girl, dealing with racial teasing and racial slurs, and how she didn't really see that much representation in science roles on television, and how now, through science communication, she's determined to be that representation that she didn't have growing up. This is my interview with Jaida Elcock. All right, Jaida, thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Reclaimed Personas. And really, the first thing I want to get started knowing about you is just tell me about what you do and about what your research is about.
Sure, yeah. So my real title is that I am a joint program student at MIT and Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in the biological oceanography department. That's kind of a mouthful, so we just call it the MIT Hui JP for BO, which is also kind of a mouthful. But my official title is like a PhD student doing biological oceanography. More specifically, I kind of refer to myself as broadly just a shark scientist. I study sharks. I'm looking specifically at like movement ecology, behaviors, looking at like the energetics of how are these sharks moving across entire ocean basins. Like you're doing like the marathon of all marathons, and before marathons people are like, let's fuel up with a lot of pasta. I'm like, well, what are you fueling up with, and how are you doing that? Where are you doing that? Where are your resources that are important to you, for a bunch of different species? And so that's something that I've been interested in for a while, which is really funny because I grew up being afraid of sharks. We can get into that later too if you want, but yeah, so that's kind of what my research is right now, looking at sharks, trying to understand where they're going, why they're going certain places, what they're doing while they're there, and all that kind of stuff.
Well, thank you for that. And you said you grew up being afraid of sharks. I mean, me too, I guess. I grew up in Florida, but, and I'm back here in Florida right now. But always get those warnings about sharks. So tell me why sharks now then? How did you go into sharks in particular?
Yeah, so it's funny because I grew up in entirely landlocked states my entire life. I lived in Illinois till I was 10, and then I lived in the middle of the desert in Phoenix until I was like 22. And that's when I started grad school. I was like, all right, I've lived in the desert for long enough, time to move to a coastline. And so I think I kind of got from this fear of sharks onto I want to study sharks through this pathway of just learning more. I think that fear a lot of the time comes from just not knowing. It just comes from maybe misinformation or just lack of information, which I think can be just rectified by learning a lot more. So my family and I watched a lot of like Animal Planet and Discovery Channel and Nat Geo and stuff like that when I was a kid. And so watching all these shows and documentaries, I started to learn more about the ocean. And I've always been in love with the water. My mom always called me a water baby. And so I've always been in love with the water. And so I was like, oh, the ocean is awesome. Like I want to learn more about it. And then I started to learn more and more about sharks, realizing that they are played out to be these villains, that they're like these mindless eating machines. And I started to realize that that is just simply not true. They're incredibly important and essential to our ecosystems in the ocean. Without them, I don't even know what the ocean would look like, and I don't want to know what it would look like. And so in learning a lot more about them, I also then realized that there's so much that we don't know about them. and understanding how important they are to our environment and realizing that we really don't know that much. I was like, well, we should know more. I want to learn more. And in learning more, you can kind of dispel some of these fears or at least lessen them to a degree where we're not letting the fear get in the way of the respect that we should have for these wild animals. So once I got to a point where I was like, well, I've learned a bunch, but there's so much that I don't know. Like I have more and more questions. At some point, science didn't have answers for me anymore. And I was like, guess I have to be the scientist and I have to find the answer. So I guess that's kind of how I got into shark science.
Yeah, and uh, so you said a couple of things there that were really interesting. But in the research that you're doing now you said now you have to be the shark scientist. What are some of the interesting things that you've discovered in your research? Is there? I mean, I'm sure there's a ton, but could you give me something that you've sort of discovered in your research that's just super interesting?
So I'm still pretty early on in my research journey specifically.
Sure.
So I don't have really, I guess, results or anything to share. I don't have any big publications or anything like that just yet. But some things that I have learned recently from some pretty recent publications that have come out is that there are two known omnivorous shark species. We like to think of sharks as like hypercarnivorous. They only eat other fish or mammals or whatever it is. But there are two species that we know of that uh, don't just ingest plant matter, but they also are able to like break it down and digest it and get nutrients from it. And that is the bonnethead shark, which is the smallest of the 10 hammerhead species, and the world's largest fish, the whale shark. So I thought that was fascinating. And then another thing is that this one's so weird. Whale sharks, I like to say this sentence and then I'll elaborate. Whale sharks have teeth on their eyes. So this is exactly why I
What?
phrase it this way. So, shark skin is called dermal denticles. Dermal being like teeth, right? And so, oh wait, no, dermal being skin, denticles being teeth. There we go. And so it basically is like their scales are essentially like modified teeth, and they have that all over their bodies. But whale sharks happen to have those covering their eyeballs as well. And so I like to tell people that whale sharks have eye teeth because it's a really weird sentence and it gets people intrigued so you can tell them a little bit more.
That is fascinating. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
like that sort of getting them intrigued to tell more. We're going to get more into your communication style in a little bit, but I think that's an important part of communication is sort of drawing people in initially. And then also omnivorous sharks. That reminds me of Finding Nemo. Fish are friends.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So
That's so funny.
that's one of my son's favorite movies.
It's a great movie.
Yeah, it's a great
It's one of
movie.
my favorites.
Yeah, well, there you go. And it's one of my favorite movies again because I watched it before my son was ever born, and then now I'm like, oh, this is a pretty good movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's nice because I've got a bunch of nieces and nephews. It's nice when they fixate on a movie that isn't like irritating,
Mm-hmm.
so that when they ask to watch it 7 times a day, you're like, okay, I can handle this.
Oh,
It's not terrible.
absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so we talked a little bit about sort of what you do. I want to know a little bit more about you. So, who is Jaida Elcock? What are the defining aspects of who you are and your identity?
That's such a big
It
question, and I
is.
really like it because it allows me to kind of like reflect on like who I am, what are the things that I'm most proud of about myself. I am a Midwesterner, but also a desert girl, spending half of my childhood in both of those places. I am a Black, white, biracial woman. I am a bisexual woman. I am so many different identities. I don't know. I like to think of myself as a good friend and a good partner, and a very curious, lifelong learner. I'm always wanting to learn more. And I am a communicator, as we've kind of said. Like I love communicating with people, whether it be about science or listening to someone share their passions with me or whatever it may be. And so I think that there's a lot of different aspects of myself that come together to create me as a whole. A lot of those being, the things that I just mentioned, but also my family. I'm super family oriented. My family means everything to me. I'm very connected with my dad's side of the family, which is like the Afro Caribbean side of my family. Connected with some of my mother's family as well. They come from Germany, but like way back, anyone in Europe is like, you're not German. And I'm like, that's fair, just American. Because it was like 1900, like early 1900s or something, they came over from Germany. But Yeah, super family oriented. Like I said, I've got a bunch of nieces and nephews. I am obsessed with them. I love them. They call me Auntie Yay, because they couldn't say J to begin with, and then it just kind of stuck. So being an aunt, I think, is a big part of my identity. Being a sister, being a daughter, like I said, being a friend and a partner, and just being someone who is curious and really excited about life in general.
That's awesome. And I heard you say, I have to pause because I heard you say Afro Caribbean. I have to ask, what part of the Caribbean is your dad from?
Yeah, so my dad's parents were born in Guyana. My dad is first generation born here, and so that would make me and my brothers, and my sister second generation born here. Um, and a lot of people, this one's really interesting, as people will ask me like, "Oh, like where's your family come from? Where's your like your heritage?" And I'll say Guyana, and they go, I think you mean Ghana. And I'm like, no, I said Guyana. It's in South America. It is very culturally Caribbean. It's like right there, if you've seen like the geography of South America and the Caribbean, it's like right next to the Caribbean, like just north of Brazil. So it's continentally South America, culturally very Caribbean.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where that comes
Yeah,
from.
one of my good friends is from there.
Oh,
Yeah,
no way.
yes,
Amazing.
yes. One of my good friends from college. I'll shout her out. Hey, Tawina. Yeah. So, okay, and I'm Haitian. That's why I asked. My family's
Oh,
Haitian.
awesome.
Yeah, so definitely Caribbean. So I love other Caribbeans. I love connecting with them. So
Yeah, that's awesome.
okay, so now you told us a little bit about your identity. There's a lot there, and obviously this podcast is a little bit about sort of some of the marginalized aspects of the identity of Black folks, Black women. Can you tell me about some of your earliest experiences navigating those parts of your identity, and how those experiences impacted you throughout and then up until today?
Yeah, so I grew up in predominantly white spaces my entire life. Most of the Black people that I knew around me were my family. And I don't think that that's something that I really processed or like understood that I was quote unquote different, um, from a lot of the other kids around me until probably like high school or maybe middle school. Um, because all of my friends, like, no one had any issues. None of their parents had any issues, at least not that I saw. And if that were the case, then my parents definitely protected me from it and were like, we're not going to expose her to this negativity at such a young age. I think once I started realizing that I guess I was in a way less accepted than my peers was probably in middle school. I went to school with braids and people would yell Snoop Dogg songs at me in the hallway. And I was like, this isn't even like original or funny. Like, what do you, I mean, can you at least make me laugh a little if you're gonna be a terrible person? Like, I don't understand. And so I was like, it was super annoying. And that kind of carried on through high school. Not the well, bits and pieces of it got better, bits and pieces of it got worse. Um, uh, my whole like high school softball team, and this is something that I have forgiven them all for because I think that at 14 years old, you don't exactly know what's good or bad. And a lot of them have stepped back and been like, whoa, this was a terrible thing. Should not have done that. I apologize. And like they've become better people. And, that's how we grow. That's what happens. But I think like most of the softball team called me the N-word with like as like a term of endearment because they were like, oh, she's like our friend. And I was the only Black person on the team. And at the time, I didn't really realize how bad that was, and then I started to realize it later on. I was like, "Oh my god, how did I allow this to happen?" But also, being the only person on like the only Black person on the team, you feel kind of like you don't have a place to say, "Hey guys, maybe we shouldn't be doing that." That makes me really uncomfortable. So I just kind of let it slide, I guess, and was like, yeah, we're all friends, whatever. And so, again, they've all taken, steps back and been like, that was bad. We apologize. Like, they are not those people anymore. And I totally, forgive them for that. Everyone does stupid things when they're younger. And it was good to see that a lot of them have grown. Um, but that's kind of when I started to realize differences in the way that I was treated versus some of my friends. And so I saw the same sorts of things in college as well with people saying, "Oh, well, you are black, but you want to go into ocean science, but like, LOL, black people can't swim. And I was like, haha, original, great. Or people constantly trying to touch my hair without permission, or once I got dreadlocks, being like, those aren't professional, or oh, you only got this scholarship because of affirmative action. You're not even that smart. So these are all things that I've heard, and I think for a long time I internalized them. Um, and then I got to a point where I was like, no, I'm like really proud to be black, to be who I am, to be raised by the family that I was raised by. And I got to a point where I was like, this negativity has nothing to do with me and everything to do with you. You have things that you need to figure out, and I'm going to give you the space to do that by simply not interacting with you anymore. I have things to do that are better than trying to teach you to be a better person. Like, that is not my job. And so I just got to a point where I was like, yeah, I mean, if it's egregious, like, I'm going to call you out on it for sure. I'm going to say, hey, that was bad. You should fix that and not do that anymore. And then I will move on, because again, then it's their responsibility to do something about it. And I'm just going to keep doing my research and living my life and having fun. So I try not to let other people's comments bother me. And again, sometimes they do get to you a little bit. I mean, it sucks to be treated differently than other people, but I don't ever see myself as like a victim or anything like that. Like, I have the experiences that I have. Some are great, some are not, and I live my life the way that I want to. And if people have something negative to say about it, especially just because I'm black, then that's their problem, not mine.
Yeah, I love that. Not love that you have those experiences, but love that.
Yes.
love
No, I get it.
love that. The way that you've sort of switched that mindset, and I mean, I can definitely relate to a lot of what you talked about. Going through high school. I mean, I was born in Florida, South Florida, very diverse. Moved to North Carolina, where I spent most of my childhood and middle school, high school, right? And I had a lot of the same sort of, people playing with racial humor a little bit, and thinking that it was okay. Same kind of story as you. Like, most of the people, like, we've all grown in different ways. We've all, we've all. I would hope that we're all better people than we were when we were in middle and high school. But that is a part of the journey of people of color, right? As people are exploring the world, and you kind of said it best, strangely enough, when you were talking about sharks, right? Like, we fear what we don't know, or do you ever think of that parallel, by the way, of like sharks and like, the fear that people have for other communities?
Yeah, I think I do. I think that, being someone that I feel like I don't know, people don't understand people of color very well
Yeah.
sometimes. And also, just as a person, I am very like loud and outgoing, and like I'm like a lot for people sometimes. And sometimes people are like, I don't get why she's like this. And that's totally fine. I'm not for everyone. Um, but I see those parallels not just between sharks and myself, but between sharks and like marginalized groups of like just misunderstood and so easily seen as the villain. So they just, kind of cast you aside and are like, we don't want to deal with these people or these sharks or whatever, because they've been so easily made to look like such a bad character in the story. Um, and then I see a lot of parallels too of like going through and looking at, oh, well, they're so important to the ecosystem. Like, yes, and people of color are very important to like the culture and the society that we've built in America. Like the foundation of it, really. So I see those parallels a lot. And then I kind of sit and think to myself, I'm like, did I end up in shark science because I just like subconsciously was like, I relate to you? I have no idea.
Well, you mentioned something about sort of like your progression into sort of shark scientists, people thinking that you got scholarships because of affirmative action, and and sort of like the professional side of navigating your race. And I want to know a little bit more about that. What is the, not ecosystem, what is the environment like? Like, are there other people of color, Black people in marine sciences? I'm sure there are, but what are the numbers like? You may not know the exact numbers, but what is it generally like?
Yeah, I think that we as a society are like, oh, people of color, like women of color, aren't interested in marine science. I don't know where that idea comes from of like black people don't like being outside. And, there's obviously a lot of like generational trauma and history around black people and water. But that overgeneralization of like, oh, black women and black people just like aren't interested in marine science or like being outside. I'm like, I don't know who told you that. What do you mean? I'm standing right in front of you. What do
Right.
you mean? And the numbers I think would really shock some people. There are so many different organizations out there, um, including my own nonprofit organization that I founded with three other Black women in shark science. There's Black in Marine Science. They have a ton of members. My organization, Minorities in Shark Sciences, also known as MISS, we have, I think, something like 400 members in like 30 to 40 countries across the world. Like, we are plentiful, we are everywhere. And no matter like wherever people of color are, there are going to be people of color doing science
Yeah.
because science involves everyone and everyone is affected by science. And so I feel like it's this really weird stereotype that like, oh, people of color don't want to do science. And I'm like, you literally could not be more wrong. There are entire organizations, and not just the two that I mentioned. Like there's Black in neuroscience, there's like Latinx in marine science, like just covering every demographic group you could potentially think of. Um, and there are countless members in all of these organizations. Like, we are everywhere. And so I really don't know where this idea is coming from. That's a lie. I think a lot of this idea is coming from what we see, like the lack of representation. So like on TV, you see a lot of like the same cookie cutter shark scientists or scientists in general. It's like the same white dudes that are featured on the same shows every year. And I'm like, can we get some diversity? Hello, we've got 400 members that would love to be featured and talk about their science. And also they're Black women and non-binary Asian people. And again, every demographic group you can think of, like, we are everywhere. So I think the lack of representation is something that I found very frustrating, as well as the other co-founders of Miss. And that is the lack of representation, and also the feeling of kind of being one of the only people that looks like me in a room full of my colleagues, was a couple of the big reasons that kind of spurred us to say, we really want to start like some sort of group so that we have a bigger community that we can, go to about certain situations or just feel welcomed, or whatever it may be. So that was kind of, I guess, like the seed that planted, that created Miss in the end.
Yeah. First of all, I mean, I love to hear you say that, people of color in the sciences are plentiful. I have seen it. I know it to be true. And yet, I think what you said earlier about representation is a really important thing. We tend to not, if we don't see it, we don't know. And I also like the nonprofit that you created. Could you shout out your co-founders real quick by name? I want to make sure that everybody knows sort of who they are as well.
Absolutely. So our president and CEO is Jasmine Graham. Our CFO is Amani Weber Schultz. Our director of communications is Carly Jackson Bohannon, and the director of public relations is me. And the four of us are the co-founders of Miss.
Yeah. How did you all find each other?
Twitter. All of this started during the pandemic, like
Okay.
like like May and June of 2020. So like heat of the pandemic, everyone's inside. Vaccines aren't even a thought yet. Well, they are, but like not for us. And so there was all of this civil unrest around like George Floyd, and police brutality in general. And then this incident happened with, I think his name was Chris Cooper, was a Black man who was birding
Yep.
outside in a park. And this white woman came up and had her dog off leash. And he was like, hey, you're not supposed to do that. Put your dog on a leash. And she was like, basically went off and was like, I'm going to call the police and tell them that a Black man is threatening my life. Fully weaponizing the police, knowing exactly what she's doing. And so there was a whole uproar around that. By the way, he ended up like, he was safe. He's been seen on many platforms now and, is a huge advocate. Glad to know that he's doing well and is safe, and hope that he's enjoying
I
birding
think he I think
safely.
he has a show
Um,
on National Geographic or some sort of.
I think
Yeah.
that you might be right. I didn't say that because I wasn't sure, but I hope he does. He seems like a cool guy.
Yeah, he does. He does.
Yeah. So when all that happened, there was then a hashtag going around Twitter, hashtag Black in Nature. And so I think Jasmine, Carly, and Amani. I think I tweeted under it, but I don't remember. I know the three of them tweeted under it and were like, look, it's me doing field work. I'm in nature. I'm black. Hello, we exist. Shock. And they all kind of found each other and they were like, a black woman shark scientist, another black woman shark scientist. And then they found me on Twitter as well. We all just kind of started a group chat and we're like, hi, none of us have ever met. Jasmine had spoken to me and Amani because we tried to like interview in the lab that she was in. It didn't work out, but it's totally fine. And so like that was like the most interaction that we have had, which was incredibly minimal.
Wow.
And so we were like, hey, do we want to start an organization? And Jasmine was like, yes, we're doing this. Like we're going to make it happen. And then we hopped on a Zoom call. And then 2 weeks later, we launched an organization. Don't know how we got that out so fast, but we really wanted to launch on Juneteenth because of the significance to the Black community.
Yeah.
And so all of this started on Twitter. And then 9 months later, when we had our first in-person like shark tagging workshop, was when we finally all met in person for the first time, which is wild.
That's very wild. And but it also says something about sort of the times that we're in and sort of what the pandemic sort of forced us into, right?
Yeah.
But that's amazing. That's amazing. And I'm glad that you all found each other. And you mentioned earlier about representation, and I think that's a great example of, you know, I don't know. I don't remember exactly what I saw first, if it was your organization or if it was, you know, your I guess personal channels. But I know why I tuned in. I know why I kept coming back. Right? It was because of the representation, and it was so, I guess, refreshing to see, and your personality, right? Your personality, and we're gonna get into that a little bit. But I just there was a lot there and a lot of reasons to keep coming back. So I'm glad that you all found each other. And you mentioned that one of your or I guess your role in Miss is you do public relations. And one of the things I saw is you, in addition to being a marine scientist, you say you're a science communicator. What does that mean?
I think being a science communicator just means that you are out here trying to, I guess, in the simplest form, communicate science to the public. But I like to think of it, there's so many different ways to do science communication. And I like to say that there's no wrong way to do science communication as long as you're communicating accurate science. But it can be a way for you to, you know, bond with your family and talk about science. It can be a way for you to take a scientific paper that maybe is really complicated to understand and bring it into a more digestible level for the general public, for people who aren't in the field and don't understand all of this like super heavy jargon. And it can be a way for, like, what I try to do, just teach people about animals, get people excited about science, get them intrigued, maybe help to dispel a little bit of fear. I've had a couple comments that are like, I'm still afraid of sharks, but now I know more about them and I think they're really cool. And I'm like, that is absolutely a win in my book. You're allowed to be afraid, because I'm afraid of spiders and I recognize that that's irrational. They're very important to the environment as well. But it's nice to know that, you know, some of my content has helped someone be like, oh, I learned something new today. And now I'm just a little bit less afraid of this thing. I think that I mean, that's one of my goals now, even if it wasn't when I started. But I think that's always been one of my goals, to just kind of, you know, give people little nuggets of information that they can hold on to.
Yeah, and you do a really good job of that. Like you're
Thank
on
you.
you're on TikTok, you're on Instagram, you're on Twitter or X, whatever it's called now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. You may be on other channels. I don't know. How would you say social media has, I guess, impacted your ability to do science communications, and and why did you choose those channels?
Yeah. So I think that social media has been almost entirely like the reason that I've been able to do science communication. I started doing science communication in like January of 2020, and then everything shut down. And then I just kept doing science communication because I was already doing it on social media. And I guess I started on Twitter because I had an internship where I was doing research, and the head of the labs, Dr. Adam Summers at Friday Harbor Labs in Washington, was like, you should have a science Twitter. And I was like, no. And he was like, no, you should have a science Twitter. I was like, all right, I'll make one. So I came up with the name Sophistication because I thought it was funny. And from there, I just kind of, posted every once in a while of like, I don't know, here's a cool thing that I was working on or whatever it may be. And then I got more into science communication when I got onto TikTok, and I was like, for the longest time I was like, I'm not doing it. I refuse to download TikTok. I'm not going to cave. Vine was better.
True.
And then and then I got bored in like December of 2019. And I was like, all right, fine. I cave. I'll download TikTok. And then I was seeing all these people that had like their thing. Like artists were drawing companies as people, and like dancers were making choreographed dances and all kinds of really fun stuff. And I was like, well, I want a thing. That sounds fun. I talk a lot and I know a lot about animals. What if I just start there? And so I started making these animal fact videos. And my friend was like, you should also post them on Twitter. And I was like, all right, I guess. But everyone that follows me, I feel like is a scientist. So like they already know all of this. I was so wrong. Like, I think from like March 2020, honestly, maybe even before then. I think it was maybe like February 2020 to like March or April. I hit like I had gained like 10,000 followers. And I was like, how, I don't even know. I blinked. I'm just some like nerd on the internet being like, fun animals. Wow. And people were like, we love it. Give us more. And I was like, okay. And since it was during lockdown, I made a video like every single day for months. And I think that everyone being locked inside and having nothing to do but scroll was one of probably a few factors that went into me being able to like build the following that I now have. And then since then, I've had friends be like, "Hey, well, I don't have TikTok. Can you post them on Instagram too?" I was like, "Okay." So I started posting them on Instagram. I post them on Snapchat for like my buddies. And it all just kind of stemmed from this original uh, science Twitter that I was encouraged to make by Adam. So shout out to Adam. Thank you for that. And then these TikToks that my friend encouraged me to then post on Twitter. Um, and it all just kind of exploded from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good sort of, I guess, story about like how you didn't you didn't really know completely what you were doing. You just got these little tips from people, and you just tried things. And you mentioned like part of the reason um, why you were successful is lockdown, but you've now have had time to sort of look back about the success that you've had. Have you identified other things that have worked well, or other reasons why you think that? Um, I'm sure that there are people who started things in the lockdown that maybe don't have the following that you do. So what are some other reasons do you think that you've been so successful on social media?
I think that part of it is probably due to, I just feel like scientists should be people.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like a lot of times people see scientists and they're like, oh, they're these like all-knowing beings, I don't know. And they'll ask you a question. And when your answer to that question is, I don't know, let's find out together, they're like, oh, wait, what? You didn't know the answer? I'm like, no, I don't know everything. I don't even know everything about sharks. There are over 500 species. I could not come close to naming them all. Um, and so I think just being transparent about like, this is my life, and towing the balance between like oversharing on the internet and also like being this like really mysterious person. I think that I've kind of found a balance of that, of being like, share your highs of like, oh, I finally got my code to work today after 2 weeks of not understanding it and wanting to throw my computer out a window. um and then just the transparency of like who you are as a person, and also where you get your sources from, I think is something that helped me. I think that builds trust with your audience. So I have done videos on animals that I don't know much about, so I need to do a little bit of research, and I'll go to like a Nat Geo article, or like an aquarium fact page or something like that, to make sure that I'm getting information that I know is accurate, rather than just like, here's a Wikipedia article. um so being able to share those with my audience and being like, here's where I got my information from, and if you want to learn more, check out this link. I think that that type of transparency is also pretty helpful. And I think that another part of it is just, I like to do my science in a very upbeat way, because I'm a very upbeat, happy, energetic person. So that's the way my videos come through as well, which is good. And I think that especially during lockdown and And ever since then, there's so much terrifying and like grief worthy stuff happening in the world that sometimes someone is like, I'm so overwhelmed with everything going on in the world. It's not that I don't care, but I need 5 minutes to look at something that doesn't make me want to cry. And I think that, having an outlet of someone like me or some of my other science communicator friends having a video that's just like, here's this goofy animal and why I think it's weird. I think that that can definitely help just kind of like ease your mind a little bit. Like, I know there's so much happening, but sometimes you just have to take a minute to step back and be like, I have to find some source of joy somewhere. And maybe some people hopefully found that in my science communication, which if that's the case, then like, I'm so happy that I was able to like make someone smile.
I'm sure. I mean, I can say that you definitely have. Sitting right here, but I'm sure that I think you. If I were to assess, just looking at your social media, those are a lot of things that I would say, right? Like you mentioned, sort of the transparency of, when you don't know something, or you might do more research. So one of the things that's cool about that, first of all, is that you're learning as you're communicating. You're learning more as you're communicating. That's awesome. But also, like, I think one of the things I saw one of your videos, and you were saying the scientific name of, I don't remember what animal, and you're like, I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm not sure. And it was like, it was so relatable because, like you said, a lot of times people expect scientists to have all of the answers. And for me, I know I can't pronounce the majority of those scientific names. And seeing you in that role, also not being sure, it was really relatable. And I enjoyed watching that. And I felt like, okay, this person is like me, smarter than me in at least in this way, but probably in a lot of ways. But but I was like,
No.
this is fantastic. And so I think that's part of it. You mentioned something also about the a lot of what's going on in the world, and sort of uh being sort of a different upbeat energy in contrast to a lot of the depressing things that people um are receiving. But one of the questions I have is, do you ever feel like, should I comment on that? Like, when something's happening in the world, now that you have this sort of platform, do you ever feel like, should I insert myself, or would it be better to just not? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, I think that for things that I know about and feel strongly about, I'm like, this is something that I'm going to comment about. So with like, as a part of the LGBT community, when I see people coming after, trans rights or LGBT rights, I'm like, hey, that's wrong. People are people. Allow them to exist, please. And I will stand very strongly with that stance. If there are things that I maybe don't know enough about, I don't want to, just because I have a following, be like, here's my stance on this. And then realize later that like I didn't have enough information and I've now changed my opinion, which if you change your opinion later on because you found new information, that's totally fine. Like, again, that's growth. But there are times when I'm still learning about a situation and I don't want to comment on it yet because I'm not knowledgeable enough in the area to feel like my voice, not that it doesn't have an impact, but that I want it to have the impact that I want it to have, if that makes sense. And so there are times where maybe sometimes people are like, why haven't you commented on this? I'm like, I'm still learning about it. I need to know more before I can, outwardly express what I'm feeling about this. And I think that that is something that a lot of people maybe could practice a little bit more of. Not saying that you shouldn't stand for what you believe in, because you absolutely should. But to always, maybe take a quick step back and assess the situation. Not for like fear of getting canceled, because I'm like, if you're going to cancel me because I support the LGBT community, go for it. That's not going to change how I feel about this issue. But just making sure that you know enough about the issue to feel like you can speak on it properly, if that makes sense. That's at least how I try to approach things. But again, I will stand very firmly with the stances that I feel strongly about.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a great answer. And you mentioned, like, you know, not doing things because of the fear of being canceled, and I think that's important. Like what you said, stand by what you stand by, and if you stand by it strong enough, and if you feel it, you know, you're not going to change my mind in that way, right?
Right.
About the LGBTQ Q community and your what you just said, or whatever the cause is. And at the same time, you have a following, and you've grown a large following. And do you sometimes think about, though, like, if I do misspeak, not if I speak about what I know, but because you mentioned like the fear of misspeaking. Do you sometimes think, um, fear, like, if I do misspeak, I might alienate people that I care about. I might alienate these followers. Like, how is that part of your thought process too, or did I just put words in your mouth? If I did, I didn't mean to.
No, no, absolutely. I mean, I definitely don't ever want to misrepresent the way that I feel about things. And I think that, in certain situations, misspeaking isn't always not that it's not a problem. It just means that maybe there's area for you to grow.
Yeah,
And I think that there are a lot of times where people are afraid of being like a strong ally because they're like, well, what if I say something wrong? I'm like, I'd rather you say something wrong, but you're trying rather than not trying at all. And so I kind of take the same approach where I try my best to be knowledgeable. And if I misspeak, or have a slight misstep or something like that, and someone comes to correct me, I'm like, oh, I didn't know this. Thank you so much for letting me know, for like calling me in on this. I will, make sure that I retain this, that I do a little bit more research on it so that I can be more knowledgeable in the things that I say in the future. And I've had that happen before where I think it was the hard of hearing community. I had used the phrase hearing impaired, and they were like, we don't appreciate that term. We prefer hard of hearing. And I was like, oh, I had no idea. So sorry. And I deleted the post and I re-uploaded it with the phrase hard of hearing instead. And I think that it really is as simple as that. Just, taking the comments that you have been given by people of a community that you are not a part of, and recognizing that you cannot know everything about someone else's community because you're not a part of it. You can know as much as you can try to know. You can always try and learn more. And so I just kind of do my best to uh, have, the best intentions while recognizing that impact over intentions every single time. So if I impact someone negatively, I understand that and I take that and I say, I'm sorry. I recognize that I hurt you and I apologize for it. I'm going to do better in the future. And then you make the actions to do better.
yeah.
So just, trying to do your best. And when you misstep, making the
Yeah,
corrections.
that's powerful. That's really powerful. And we talked earlier about sort of like the growth that we do from who we were in middle school and high school, and then who we are now. And I think that's an important part of it, right? Like, you mentioned, even some of your friends back then have been able to, sort of reflect on who they were, what they said, how they sort of interacted with you, and sort of grow from there. And I think that's an important part of what you're saying right now. Like, it's we kind of think of growth as this thing that happens, like, when we're going from high school to college, and maybe, a little bit beyond that, but then we're adults. But no, it continues. So, I really
Yeah.
appreciate that answer. um
Thanks.
okay, let's talk about, so you obviously, a lot of what you do on social media is about shark sciences, and science, marine science in general, and other sciences. I've seen you, uh uh I think you did something with dinosaurs one time, and so you've done some really cool stuff. But then there's also like another side of you that you let a little bit of your, certainly your personality, come out in those ways, but you also show elements of your life that have nothing to do with the sciences, right? Like, for example, karaoke. That's something that I saw
Yeah.
that you love to do. And by the way, I saw one that you did with your dad.
Yep.
Fantastic. Like,
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. I was like, okay, okay, she can sing, all right. No, like, seriously, it was really well done. And you could tell that you were enjoying yourself, and seemed like you have a great relationship with your dad. Um, so how do you decide, or think about, like, what to share, what not to share, like, from your personal life? How do you navigate that? That's one of those things that, like, as you get into this public sphere of being online, and all of our audiences, our personal audiences, our professional audiences, our followers, they all collapse into one. How do you then decide, how to navigate that, and what to share and what not to share?
Yeah, I think that that's a hard balance, for a lot of people, including me, and I think that that is a very different balance for everyone. So for me, I feel like I said before, like scientists are people, and I don't really like to hide certain parts of myself. I think that my online persona is like very similar to who I am as a person. It's really funny because my roommate now, shout out to Digo, he said that before moving here, he had been following me for like a couple years and was like, "Oh, this girl's so cool. Like her science communication is awesome. Like wow, can't believe it." And he was living in like the Midwest. And he was telling his friends, like, oh, I'm moving to like Massachusetts. I'm gonna be working at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Like, I might end up meeting this person. And they were all like, we don't know who she is, but like that's great. And then he ended up moving into my apartment and he was like, I'm losing my mind. And I was like, yeah, lol, hope you weren't disappointed. He goes, no, you're the same person. There's no difference between like who you are online versus who you are in person. And I was like, okay, great. Maybe, I'm definitely more family friendly online. I have maybe a little bit of a sailor's mouth in person, but depending on who I'm around, of course. But yeah, so I like to be, like I said, just very transparent. I am a person before I'm a scientist. If I can't be a functional person, then how am I going to be a functional scientist as well? So I try to take care of myself before I try and do the science. I try to let people know who I am as a person as well as my science. And so I kind of, things that I would be excited to, like tell an old friend that I haven't talked to in a couple months. If I'm excited to tell them about something, I'm like, why can't I share this with the internet as well? Like, ooh, I got a new boyfriend. Or like, so excited, my parents came to town. Or like, so sad, my dog passed away recently. Or, just whatever life things are happening, I think for me are totally fine to share on the internet, obviously within reason. But I like to toe that line in like leaning more transparent than not. Not saying that people who don't want to be super, public with their personal life on the internet, not saying that they are in any way deceptive. It just means that they like to be more personal, and that's totally fine. But I don't know. I like sharing bits and pieces of myself with my audience. I think it makes it a little bit more personal rather than just like clinical, scientific. You know what I mean? And that's just kind of my style. So that's
I
kind of how I
really
feel about it.
I really liked the hair retwisting tutorial because you wouldn't know it now, but I used to have locks also
Oh, that's
in
awesome.
college. Yeah. So like I was like, oh yeah, oh yeah, the palm rolling. Like I was like, yeah,
Yep.
I was right there with you. But I was like, that's a cool element to bring into this channel that is uh mainly about shark science, right? And the reason why is partially because of what we said earlier, again, about like things that we don't understand, right? And you talked about people always wanting to touch your hair and all of this stuff, right? And a lot of your followers probably look like me or probably look like you, and a lot of them don't. A lot of them are just interested in shark sciences or just interested in something
Right.
else, have found you for another reason. And now they have a window into who you are and a little bit about your hair that maybe they won't reach out and touch it. They can they can learn about it through the screen. Safe
Yeah,
distance, right? So
exactly.
I love that. And oh, there was something else that you said. I'll remember it. But oh, it was this. One of the questions I have for you is you talked about your roommate sort of being a little bit like I guess awestruck, a little like, how do you respond to that? Like this all happens very quickly for you, right? This following. And
Yeah.
now I was as I was preparing for this, I was like, man, she's probably like the second most famous Jada right now. And I was like, how do you deal with the sort of all this sort of attention and how people sort of see you as, I mean, kind of like a celebrity, right? A kind of like a personality, if you will.
Yeah, so this is so funny because my friends are always like, whenever we meet someone new or like, oh yeah, like, nice to meet you. My friends are just like, she's Instagram famous or like she's internet famous. And I'm like, you guys are embarrassing, but okay. But I've had people come up to me just like randomly out of the blue and be like, are you sophistication? Or like, oh my gosh, are you that shark lady on TikTok? I watch your videos. And I'm like, oh my gosh, thanks so much. I appreciate the support. Like, hope you enjoy them. And I feel like maybe I approach it in the same way that you would approach someone who just is like, hey, that shirt's really pretty. Where did you get it from? And just, having like a totally normal conversation with them. If they have like questions about things, I'll try my best to answer them. But just totally normal conversations. And this happened actually in the airport recently. Someone was like, oh my gosh, pause. Are you Jada? And I was like, yes. And she was like, amazing. I follow you on Instagram. I love your videos. And so then we like were walking to our gate together or whatever. And I just like noticed in her bag she had like a ball of yarn and she was knitting. And I was like, oh my gosh, you knit? I crochet. And so we talked about like yarn and like how hard it is to like crochet anything other than a rectangle. And so just, this whole theme of just like being a person, you know what I mean? And so at first it was a little odd when someone was just like, yo, I follow you, totally never thought I'd meet you, but like love your videos. I was just like, what's happening? No way. Someone met me out in the wild. This is crazy. And I was just like, oh, like, thanks, appreciate it. He was like, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to bother you. I was like, no, no bother at all. Like, have a great rest of your night or whatever. So it's still, I feel like I'm still getting used to how exactly to approach those situations. But I mean, it never like bothers me or anything like that. I've definitely had an experience where I was like having like a not great day and I was like venting to my friend about something. And then someone came up and they were like, oh my gosh, you use sophistication. And I was like, oh, that kind of made my day. Like it just, I don't know. It kind of brightens my mood a little bit. So it never bothers me, but I'm still trying to figure out exactly how to go about that because it feels so it's just an odd situation for someone to be like, I know you. And I'm like, I've never seen you in my life. You know what I mean? Like it's a little odd, but it's very sweet when people come talk to me about it and they're like, your videos are really awesome and I really enjoy them. I'm like, wow, thanks so much.
Well, I definitely hope my son gets a chance to meet you. As I told you earlier, before we started this, that he is so into aquatic life. I mean, we took him to there's a place in South Florida called Gumbo Limbo, which is they have like, you know of Gumbo Limbo?
Yes, I think actually Carly, one of the co-founders, I think she used to work there.
Ah, okay. So that's awesome. So we take him there and he's just like naming the fish, right? He's and the people around him, because he's 3 and people around him are like, what is this? Like he's just, that's him. Like he started, like it was like a parenting hack of ours where we nearby in Deerfield Beach there's there's an underwater camera, and
Cool.
on YouTube they just they'll just like stream, I guess, hours of footage of underwater camera, and then they'll cut like these little shorter videos of like the highlights, right? And he would just always be asked for like, fish cam, can I watch fish cam? And be like, okay. Like it was the easiest yes as a parent, right?
Yeah.
You like, screen time aside, you're like, if we're gonna give you screen time, this is the way
Fish
to
camp.
go, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, I hope he gets the chance to meet you one day. I did have a couple other questions. Hold on one second. Yeah, so is there anything about what you've done, either in your profession or on social media or just in general? And this is a hard question. I know it in advance, but do you feel like there's anything that you've done that's defying odds or pushing back against stereotypes? We talked about that a little bit, but do you feel like there's anything that you're doing or have done that's doing that?
Yeah, honestly, I think that being a Black person in a graduate program is already up there. I mean, if you look at the statistics of like the white population versus the Black population, and then the white population of PhD programs and the Black population of PhD programs, it is so skewed. Like there just are barriers, whether they be financial or social or whatever they may be. There are barriers for people of color. And we're slowly working to try and break those down. But they're still there for a lot of people. And so I think just being in a PhD program, maybe that's one thing. And maybe this isn't necessarily breaking any like stereotypes, but it's something that I am very proud of is that I was featured on BBC Earth's YouTube channel a couple times now, because they reached out to me and were like, "Yo, our people love seeing your videos. We want to make content with you." And I was like, "You produced Blue Planet that my like parents and I will like record and watch together, and now you want to do things with me? Like this is wild." And like we always see like David Attenborough on BBC, and like he's amazing. Absolutely no hate to David Attenborough. Love the guy. His voice is soothing. If I could have him narrate my life, I would. But it's also nice to see, like a young person of color just like in one of those roles where you expect to see like this like super renowned narrator. it's nice to be able to see that, and it's also nice to be able to be that and kind of uh be the representation that other little kids deserve to see. Um, I feel like growing up, I didn't get to see a lot of myself on TV. I saw like Steve Irwin and Jeff Corwin, and I looked up to them a lot. They're awesome. And I met Jeff Corwin once, and he was super nice. And I was like, this is the highlight of my existence. I'm obsessed with this man's TV shows and how cool he is. And so that was awesome. But it also would have been really nice to see someone that looks like me. I think for a lot of little kids, when they don't have that role model that looks like them, they don't even really process that that job is still an option for them. To the extent where, like, I have had, well, I think actually someone reached out to one of the other co-founders of Miss recently to be like, oh, like, I don't remember if it was like a daughter or a niece or like a student in the classroom or whatever, was like, saw their videos and was like, I didn't know that like girls could be scientists or black girls could be scientists or something to that vein. And I had someone tell me that their daughter saw my videos and was like, I didn't know that pretty girls could be scientists too. Like, I didn't know you could be pretty and smart.
Wow.
And I was like, first of all, that shattered my heart. And second of all, I'm glad that you now see that this is a thing that you can do.
Yeah.
So it's important, I think, to have that representation. So to not have it and then grow up and say, I don't care that I didn't have it. I'm pushing through it and I want to be this representation for other people, I think is something that I guess maybe doesn't necessarily break a stereotype, but, uplifts the population of, young women of color.
Yeah, and I mean, and I would even venture to say that the reason why representation matters is because it is breaking stereotypes, right? It is saying that what we believe to be true about a group of people is clearly not true. And here is an example of how that's not true. Now, that doesn't mean that the struggles that you may have went through to get to where you went through, or the experiences that you went through, are not real, right? But still, a person can get to where you are and be interested in the things that you do, can look like you do, sound like you do, identify in the ways that you identify, represent and show up in the world in similar ways to you, or in completely different ways from you, and still be interested in the sciences. And so I do think that that's sort of what you're doing, and I really appreciate it. And I think I saw somewhere that a goal or something that you'd want to do one day is have your own television show, science show or nature show or something like of that nature. And I for one would definitely watch it. I hope that you get that.
Thank you.
That would be phenomenal, and I am rooting for you. And I do want to know maybe that is what's next for you, but what in general, what do you know is next for you? What's coming up for you?
What I know is next is getting my PhD. Not sure when yet.
Okay. All right.
It might be in it'll probably be like 3 to 4 years. So getting this degree, and continuing my work with Miss. And then after my PhD, I get this question a lot of like, what do you want to do? Great question. I want to continue doing science communication. I think that's like the main part of what I want to do as like a career. I want to keep doing research as well, whether that looks like, helping with someone's research within minorities and shark sciences. Maybe there's like a student and I can help, facilitate, some of their research or help them with field work or whatever that might look like. But I know that I want to do science communication long term. And maybe that's like working at a national marine sanctuary, like in NOAA or something like that. Maybe that's working for like an aquarium research or not research team, like education team. Maybe it's jumping around and being a freelance science communicator and helping other scientists communicate their work so it doesn't sit in like this proverbial desk drawer, and also literal desk drawer. And I'm not exactly sure what it'll look like yet, but I'll be communicating science, whatever it is. I'll be talking about science, and I'll be just as nerdy as I am now.
we wouldn't want you any other way. And clearly you do have options. I think you've created a lot of opportunity for yourself with what you're doing as well. And I just really appreciate it. Where, Jaida, can we find you? If the people listening, like, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I am on Twitter, X, as sophistication, same as TikTok. On Instagram, I am sophistication _ because sophistication was already taken. I did try to message the person who already has that handle. Not shocked that she didn't answer me. That was a really weird message, and I don't blame her. I'm also on Blue Sky and Threads, which is also sophistication. I think Threads is also sophistication _ Anyway, I know that was really confusing. If you want to look at Minorities and Shark Sciences, our social media, our website is Miss Elasmo, MISSELASMO.org. And then our socials on like Twitter, Instagram, all the things is Miss _Elasmo. So feel free to check us out. Donate if you're feeling generous. Otherwise, just, have a browse around and see what we're up to.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jaida, for taking the time. This has been a great conversation. You start to learn about a person on social media, but it's really great to sort of talk to you. You seem very much the same person as you are on your channels, which is a joy. So thank you so much. And good luck to you with everything that you're doing. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me. This was great.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Reclaimed Personas. If you want more, please subscribe. And remember, keep claiming your space and your story.